In the first lesson, I discussed how we could use a variable to reference some piece of data multiple times without having to declare it again and again. And today what we're going to do is the same thing, but with a section of code rather than a piece of data. And what we're going to do is declare what is called a function. So I'm going to come to the top of the program, and I'm going to write my first function. To do this, I'm going to start by saying def for define, and then I'm going to give my function a name, and I'll say add to each. I'll then add some parentheses and a colon, and now I can write the code that I want to be used every time I call add to each. So I can say for I in range x I plus equals 1. Now, although I have defined this function at the very top of the program, I have said that this section of code is equivalent to this name, but I've never actually told this to run. So what I'm going to do after I've declared x, I'm going to say add to each. And then I'm going to print x. So there's a difference between actually declaring the function or defining the function and running the function. So I have to first define it, then I have to run it separately in order for the code to execute. So we'll save this and run it, and we get 2, 3, 4. Now at this point, it's important to talk about the scope of each of these variables. So where in the program do they exist? So I have defined x outside of any functions. That is in the main body of the program. So when I refer to it here, the function knows what x is. And just to show this, let's at the end of the loop print I. So within the loop, we can see that I has the value of 2 once it's done executing. But if I come down here after print x and I change it to print I, we will see that I get an error. And that's because I is not defined. Even though we have defined it here within the function, remember that you can define a variable within the for loop, it doesn't exist outside of the function. And that is called the scope of a variable. So the variable I only exists within the body in which it is declared. And that's true for all variables. So x has been declared in the main body, so it can be referred to anywhere. Whereas I has been defined inside a function, so it can only be referenced within that function. But let's say I want I out of it. Let's say I want it both to do this, and then I want it to tell me what I is. So we can have it return I. And then I can say down here at the actual call of the function, I equals add to each. And we will print both x and I. So what you'll see is that the function runs and adds a value to each of x, but then it also gives us I. So you can use the return statement to send a variable from the scope of inside a function back out to the main body of the program. So what would happen if we actually hadn't defined x outside of the function? Of course, if we run this, we're going to get an error, and that's because x is not defined, as you can see there. What we can in fact do, though, is pass a value into the function in order for it to be used in here. So first, in the definition of our function, we need to tell it that it is going to be receiving a variable. And then when we call the function, we will give it the actual value for that variable. So we'll say 4, 5, 6. Now we still won't be able to print x out here, because remember, it only exists in the scope of this function. But the function will run. So in addition to being able to send values from within a function back out of the function, we are able to send variables from outside of the function into the function. And of course, you can do this with multiple values. So I can say x, y, z up in the function header, and then I can have it return x, I, and z if I want. And what I would do in this instance is in the actual call to the function, I would have it return multiple values. So even though any given variable has a scope either in the main body of the program or within a given function, we can very easily send multiple values into the function or out of the function using these parameters and a return statement. Just make sure that if you are using multiple parameters, you actually pass multiple parameters into the function call. And if you're using multiple returns, make sure that you have multiple variables available to catch those results. So if this video was useful for you, please leave a like. It helps me grow the channel and it will help other people find the video. And again, if you would like to see these tools used in a broader context, I recommend checking out my Developer Diary series, where I am working long-term on big projects and actually putting these tools to use. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next one.